I will share my screen with the slide deck we have here. It's also linked in the agenda as well. I am JC and I work in learning and development here at GitLab. So I'll be the host for today's call, and Candace will be, or she's our diversity and inclusion manager here at GitLab, and she will be running us through some content today. We'll break out into some breakout groups and then come back and discuss. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Candace.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to tune in to find out how you can be an ally. Hopefully, you'll learn a little bit more as well. The expectation is that you can know the definition of an ally, understand how to be an ally, and also recognize when you have the ability to influence and when you can best support as an ally. I'd like to kind of throw in some additional basic concepts and terms. I know sometimes when we're going through different informative sessions, it's good to kind of understand additional things that are being discussed. So while these are coming through, privilege is an unearned advantage given to some people. So, I don't know if you've ever seen times where, you might have a certain group and they don't even understand the privilege or power that they may have. So, it's not because they completed all these levels or certain things in school. It's just an unearned privilege. Another basic term or concept we might discuss are systematic inequality, which leads to oppression throughout society, benefiting people with more privilege. So an example for this would be as we continue to further push down a particular group, or not advocate for a particular group. So it most likely just keeps them in that same space of being marginalized, which I'll discuss as well, which will keep that group just further being oppressed and the same issues being an issue for that particular group. An ally is a member of a social group that has some privilege that is working to end oppression and understands their own privilege. So this is that piece where you don't have to be a manager. Everyone has an opportunity to learn and understand how they can be an ally, how they can support groups that maybe suffering from oppression, or they just understand their own things that they have the power to influence. And power sometimes allows you the ability to control circumstances or access resources and or privileges. So an example for this would be if someone is a manager and there's someone applying for a role and a previous manager can advocate. They have the ability to control or influence the decision making for that particular person and or advocate for them. It could be someone of a diversity dimension, but it's just understanding how you have that ability to control. And then the last thing that we might discuss that comes up are marginalized groups, which can be seen or treated as unimportant, insignificant, or lower status. And it doesn't have to be, again, any particular diversity dimension. This could be someone who's an individual contributor who someone might feel, oh, you're junior in your role, so your voice doesn't matter, as an example, or you have less experience. So, we don't really want that input. So it kind of gets dismissed to the side. So it doesn't have to, again, be a particular diversity dimension. It just could be something that relates to status and things of that nature. So there's a link in the bottom that talks additionally about concepts and terms. And at your leisure, please feel free to look at it, and we'll go to the next slide. So what is an ally? An ally is someone who's willing to take action in support of another person. Have you ever had a time where you think to yourself, what can I do? So as an ally, you take on the struggle as your own. You stand up even when you feel uncomfortable, because there are a lot of times when things do get uncomfortable. You transfer the benefits of your privilege to those who lack it. So you recognize where you have the power to influence, and you transfer that ability to be able to help the circumstances change. You acknowledge that while you too feel pain, the conversation is not about you. So I know sometimes things can take on their own and develop another level of passion for it. So it's just understanding that this is still about that particular individual or that group and helping support them. Additional information is in the left-hand corner. What is an ally and what it means to be an ally for additional information. Before we get into breakout groups, I'm going to give you a little bit of information on some tips on how to be an ally. And I'll give you a couple of examples to support some of the areas. So you want to be able to identify your power and or privilege. So again, if you are someone, let's say we are looking to have something with a company, another partnership, It may be we're working on an issue internally and you can say, hey, I know someone over at X company. You understand that you as an individual, you have that connection, you have a power and an opportunity to be able to influence in that area. You want to follow and support those as much as possible for marginalized groups. That way you can educate yourself. You can understand what it is, and the knowledge is going to help you be a better ally. You also want to recognize when you make a mistake, apologize, correct yourself, and move on. You want to take the time to think and analyze a situation. And that goes hand in hand with perception and reality. Sometimes we tend to react because our own personal experiences have led us to lead, and respond in different ways. Myself being raised here in North Carolina, things are all, everyone talks in a very, hey, how you doing? But someone who may be, from upstate might see that as, why are you being so overly friendly? Or the reaction again, perception versus reality. Someone may respond in a way based on their surroundings. So understanding that your circumstances and your experiences form your perception versus the reality. Leverage others' authority and or ability to influence. And also understand that being an ally doesn't always have to relate to a marginalized group. It could be, again, an individual contributor. And this is both in your personal life and your professional life. You just want to be able to recognize, what can I do to help make this situation better? We're now going to get ready to go into our breakout groups. And we're going to talk about 15 minutes. They're going to be a set of scenarios. Your group will pick a scenario, whichever you feel is best. Most have averaged out maybe 1 or 2. You'll discuss it amongst yourself. Have someone be your spokesperson. In the document for the agenda, it has Breakout Group 1 as an example already listed. So whatever number your breakout group has, you'll type that in there and type in your summary. And when we join back in, we'll talk about what are some of the thoughts that we had in relationship to these scenarios that we'll discuss. All right, so we'll take a minute, we'll jump back in. What I'll do is I'll go through the scenarios in order, and I'll call out whichever group has theirs listed first, and hopefully whoever wants to speak up for your group, please feel free to do so and summarize it. Looking forward to hearing a lot of what was discussed. So it looks like with our I don't identify as a diversity dimension of the ERGs, our scenario A, looks like Breakout Group 1. Who would like to voluntarily summarize your thoughts?
All right, I'll go. So good discussion around just highlighting that everybody has a role to play, right, to serve as an ally. So even if you don't, associate yourself with one of the ERGs, that doesn't excuse you from participation. Everyone has an opportunity to figure out, how can you help be an ally? How can you support the diversity and inclusion of all GitLab team members?
I love that. That's a great summary. And it is just that. It's supporting everyone. We're all here as a team, and any way that you shouldn't necessarily feel because you don't identify with that diversity dimension that means you can't support or advocate or help in some way. Because there's always a way you can be, leveraged. For our breakout group 6, who would like to speak up for that group and summarizing the thoughts? Looks like some great discussions.
Hi everyone, Taylor here. Yeah, we had some great discussions just about what it meant to observably be in an ERG. We talked a little bit about what ERGs are, how they form, and then what it means to be an ally. I really liked one particular piece about how allyship's really just about being empathetic and acting with empathy every day, and just creating a place where anyone who might identify with a particular ERG feels welcome. And I think particularly in an industry like security, where there are just systemic issues broadly in the community, and us being an open source software, we kind of have the responsibility to push that allyship and to really create a safe space for people to contribute.
I love that, because you're thinking about the company externally and what we do internally. So I think that's super important, because we want to be the face of what we want to attract. And how can we have empathy, to your point, if we don't try to find a way to be an ally and support? So that's great point. Looks like there aren't any more responses to that one. We can move on to maternity leave. Our breakout group one, who would like to summarize?
So I can do this one. We discussed in the call that we would probably recommend that she still be considered since she's the SME. We also discussed that maybe don't make that assumption. And I personally shared an experience myself. My sister, my nephew is 6 months old and she's trying to travel with him around the world. So we just don't know how they think. We also discussed how that also applies to fathers. We shouldn't make assumptions that new fathers can travel as well as the fact that, even if they don't travel, there are other ways to participate and contribute.
I love that, Kat. I like how you all thought about it, not from a perspective of just the female, but, fathers as well. So we want to make sure that we look at this inclusively. I love that. Great, great, great summary. Thank you. Breakout group 3. Who would like to speak up and summarize some of the points that were made? Looks like we have Tracy or Robin or Amy or Sylvia.
Sorry, I could not get off mute. We thought that it was important to make sure that we're not making decisions or allowing other people to make decisions when it's the person's individual decision, and that they should have the respect provided to them in order to make that happen. Her voice should be heard, and she should have that choice. You have no idea what her home situation is. You can't make any of those choices for her. And then everyone has the ability to contribute, and she should be able to do that and to lead that discussion and make her own choices.
Love that. Not assuming that, someone isn't available. Assumptions really change things based on what we think versus what we know. So it looks like we have breakout group 6 that put something in there. Just put breakout group 6, but I don't think they chose it. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to scenario C for age bias, unless there are any objections. So with scenario C, we have breakout group 1. Any thoughts that you all have in regards to age bias and summarizing what you have here?
I can contribute for this one. So we thought, without jumping to any conclusions about what the person meant, we should first seek clarification. That way, if they were caught up with saying something that maybe they didn't mean to, that was not nice towards somebody else, they could either come back on that by thinking about how they would explain what they really meant, or if they continue to defend what they meant, then maybe following it up by saying, well, this person trumps me with their experience because of X, Y, and Z factors. So it kind of puts it in perspective for them and maybe makes them rethink their comment.
I love that. I don't know if anyone gave any personal experiences, but this is one that we've had so far in our earlier groups and now, where people had some personal experiences with saying that they feel like they're falling into this group for whatever reason. So they kind of had a connection to it in some way. So it looks like we have breakout group 2 next to respond. Alyssa, for that feedback, by the way.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and go. This is Dave from group 2. So yeah, I think ours fell along a lot of similar lines of, we said to bring the conversations back to their skills, but then we also said, directly after that, we questioned ourselves and saying, is redirecting the conversation strong enough of a response on that? So we started to go down the road of saying, well, maybe it's not. So there should be potentially a direct challenge to say, what about X being the person that we're talking about makes you feel this way? Of challenging, what do you mean by keeping up on that? So I think that actually goes to our point 6 of the end of the call out. The specific keeping up is curious. Like, we'd want to explore that more and say, what did you mean by that? Or what do we mean by keeping up in general on that? So anyway, jumping around on my bullet points there, the next one after that was similar to what was said by group one, of maybe what was said came out a different way than what the person was intended. So again, exploring and trying to understand what was meant by that comment. And then another comment was from anybody in the group could also just clearly label and say, recognizing this statement could be taken as age discrimination and age bias, and bringing that up to the group will make everybody conscious of it and maybe reassess their frame of reference on that.
I love that. It's so many great points. One of the things that stand out most is the tip where you said that you would ask for clarification. And that's what's important sometimes is it's that tip from think and analyze it before you react, pretty much. And if you take the time to ask for clarification, sometimes you get the true understanding, so that you're acting in authenticity and that you're acting in what is the true reality and you're not assuming. So I love the way that, you're choosing to ask for clarity. Thank you for that, David. Breakout Group 4, what thoughts do you have in summary?
So this is Joyce. We actually had a couple of people in the group that this resonated for, including myself. Something I didn't put on here, but occurred to me when you said that is one of the things that comes across as age bias is you're overqualified for the job, or your salary is too high. These are two very key code phrases for you're too old. And so people are very sensitive. I think on the employee side, people are very sensitive of age, but we had a lot of conversation about how age bias isn't necessarily a well understood bias, as opposed to, say, gender bias or skin tone or accent or something like that, that might say you're from a different culture or perspective. Age isn't something people are necessarily aware that they're having a bias, and so sometimes to kind of point that out may be necessary. One of the folks, Mike, talked about helping people focus on observations rather than judgments. So saying I don't think they can keep up is a judgment, and the question would be, was there something you observed that led you to make this judgment? Because the observation may be a valid statement, which I think gets back to some of the things some of the other people were talking about, which Matt described as, let's look at facts rather than opinions.
I love that. And that's what's important, is that we do look at the facts. And if we hired everyone that was in the same age group, we would have a company that thought like the same age group. And we want to make sure we hire diverse talent. We want to make sure that we're considerate, and we're not just choosing someone to check the box, but we're choosing someone by merit and that they have the requirements to meet the job. So thank you for that, Joyce. I appreciate it. So Breakout Group 3, I see Breakout Group 5, but I didn't see words. So I'll go ahead and go to the next one. I mean, not the next scenario, but the next group that wrote a summary. So anyone from Breakout Group 3, Sylvia, Tracy, or Robin, or Amy, or Adam, that would like to summarize? I don't know if anybody was on mute trying to talk. My apologies if they were. I can summarize for Breakout Group 3 if we don't have a volunteer. So in Breakout Group 3, Sylvia had pointed out that we should consider the criteria required for the job and not the bias. Evaluate what they truly can't do. So if the requirement for the job is, whatever X is, can they actually do the job? And it's not about looking at the resume and saying they have 20 years of, difference with most of the team. Tracy had input that, she can relate to this one as she had started to feel a little older than most, but we all have different forms of experiences and niches that we bring to the table. So part of valuing a person is respecting their experiences, and that she would respond in that way, and note that it's illegal and we need to consider that. Robin had some input thinking that, thoughts that maybe they don't realize that there is a bias in what they're saying. So helping others to become allies is important, and also give an expanded viewpoint. It's a great way to collaborate as well and get results. She would counter with that and what they do offer. Adam had, thoughts of focusing on the value that they bring to the role. Again, some of the same similar thoughts. So we'll move on to our last scenario. Being mindful of time, we're at 5:37, and that's perception. So team member A strongly disagrees, and everyone has read it, but I wanted to know, let's see what Breakout Group One, what thoughts that they may have for their summary and perception.
I can answer this one. So we responded in a similar way that we did to C, which is to first start with sort of asking a clarifying question or make the person be more clear about what they meant, right? So in the stated response here, I think it says, they note that teammate members' tone was strong, or they're sort of speaking in these sort of vagaries. So the first step could just be to say, like, ask the person, what did you mean by that? Or sort of more clearly identify what the problem is. And that sort of forces them to either be explicit, which would clarify maybe they're not, being prejudiced, or clarify maybe perhaps they are, which would be unfortunate, or maybe they meant something specifically that would be okay or appropriate, but nonetheless would be better if stated explicitly. And we noted that both in this and in the prior example, a lot of times these sort of prejudices that happen with privilege sort of can function with innuendo and indirect speak, right? So if we, if a group is sort of the empowered group, usually their way of speaking or their preferences are the default, right? So really obvious examples, like if you're left-handed, right? That's not necessarily a protected class, but nonetheless, right? Like the world's kind of shaped for those people. So forcing people to be explicit, I think, is sort of the important next step in this one as well. And then depending what they say, obviously would determine what the next step would be. But obviously if they were saying something that was prejudiced or was in a way that was not acting as an ally, it would be, I think, appropriate to be clear about that in front of the group in a way that's maybe somewhat specific, but also generic, like, hey, like as was said previously on the call, that sort of thing can easily be taken as a prejudice statement. But also probably want to follow up with that person individually, depending on your relationship with them, make sure that things are sort of buttoned up, and also follow up with the team member that might feel excluded, to make sure that they feel like they're in a secure place where they can share.
I like that, Justin. I like how your group kind of covered different steps and phases, and how, from opening it up, getting clarity, closing it up, but following back up to make sure everything is okay. So you kind of covered each steps, and also thinking about, as you said, the innuendos, and just continuing that. We need to be able to have a voice, or whomever needs to be able to have a voice that's not the same as the room. So that's very important. So thank you for that. Thank you. Breakout Group 5. And this is our last feedback. So.
Oh, I think 2 is next.
Oh, 2. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry. No worries, because it was my assignment, so I want to do my duty. No worries.
No. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries. I'm not going to read every bullet.
Please do.
Well, the gist of what we're getting towards is, one, make sure we understand, and we put out kind of the point of the disagreement, right? The person spoke out because they had something that they wanted to say, and no matter whatever they had to say is valid. Everybody's opinion is valid. But then really try to highlight the kind of, it says here, the mechanics of the dynamic, right? It's hard to speak up when you're in a minority. And so kind of pointing out to person B who's complaining, to say, look, it takes courage to say something, and that's a tough room. And maybe the tone came out strong because of that, that dynamic, and not because they had bad intent. So kind of trying to paint the picture as an ally of both the minority and the majority, right? To help them understand that you too can understand where this person's coming from. And we also thought that it would be good to be conscious of not isolating that person who's doing the complaining, because they might just turn around and start complaining to somebody else, but rather try to pull them in and understand the perspective of the other person. Maybe I might follow up with the person who did the complaining in the meeting to say, but I understand what you're getting at. And maybe just help them understand to be conscious of their tone a little bit, because we want to be as dispassionate as possible when we're trying to convey a disagreement, so that our words are heard and not necessarily our emotions, but certainly not isolate that person either.
I like that. And I like the fact that you're containing it, and you're not letting it kind of become, things becoming contagious. And so once someone else complains, it's like the next person complains, and it slowly kind of, sometimes it'll die out at some point, but it's just another thing that could be addressed. And so being able to control that is awesome. And I love how the way that you all show the ally. Another thing is, you know, you're talking about the tone, and that's so important. And what the biggest thing is that sometimes someone who doesn't have a voice normally, whether it's an individual contributor versus someone who's more junior on the team, most of the team is junior, or whether it's a particular diversity dimension that's only one of that particular one, when they speak up, it sometimes sounds loud because they're used to them not saying anything. And so having a voice sometimes sounds louder. So there's so many ways and angles that we can take that. So thank you for that. And this one, I think, is the last one. So Breakout Group 5, who would like to summarize?
I think we touched on a lot of it already, specifically what you just said about how sometimes, given the power dynamic, the dissent, that the tone can be misread, and it is loud in general. You know, like it doesn't come quietly. So we really focused on the necessity to speak with team member B directly to address it and get some clarification, and make sure that they understood that dissent can be difficult to voice in that scenario, and that it's really important to, you know, hear all the opinions, and that the, you know, diversity of opinions is a healthy part of natural discourse and discussion, and that we need to take that into consideration regardless of the tone that they perceived. I think we also felt like it was important to acknowledge the perception of the tone and say that that's a valid opinion, but it is subjective, and you have to also consider that given the power dynamics or whatever, the dynamics of the room, that may have been the only way that team member A felt like they could be heard. And if you assume positive intent, there could also be other scenarios. Maybe, you know, there are other reasons that their tone was taken the wrong way, and give them an opportunity to find some empathy there. And then also just bringing it back to the discussion on its merits, and find a way to find common ground between the two, regardless of the tone. Maybe say, like, you know, maybe other people felt the same way and they didn't feel like they could raise their voice. Let's think about some of the merits of that dissenting opinion, and see if you can put yourself in their shoes, and kind of bring it back to the discussion itself.
Love that. I love that. Gold star for the portion, especially on assuming positive intent. That's one of the things that I feel like resonates through all of this. We want to make sure that we do assume positive intent. I've heard people in earlier discussions, and one of the recorded sessions earlier, where they said that this has happened and the person was deaf. Her husband was deaf, so he was talking loud because he was deaf. Or another person said that, you know, that's where they grew up, and they're just loud. And so, you know, you have to consider people's experiences. So to your point, putting yourself in their shoes, you don't have to actually understand why, but just know that assuming positive intent. So I'll wrap this up and turn it over to JC, but I hope that you all were all able to understand in some way how you can be an ally, because there's so many ways here at GitLab to influence, whether you're in a recruiting role or whether you're hiring people, and whether you sit back and you realize in your personal life or your professional life, wow, someone's voice isn't heard, and, you know, how can I help better support in some way? And hopefully you've determined what your power to influence is. And I hope there were actually some surprises on things that you hadn't thought about before within some of these scenarios, or maybe you can just think of them differently. So hopefully this has been helpful, and I'll turn it over to JC.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. It sounded like there were some really great discussions. So at this time, does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask that either Candace or myself can answer? If not, Candace is a really great resource, and you can always reach out to her with your questions as they pertain to, you know, being an ally or different tips and tricks. But if no one has any questions, we do have an evaluation. Oh yeah, Joyce, do you have one?
I have a process question. For some of these courses, we take a quiz and then we get a badge. Where's the badge?
Yeah, we're working on it. Yes.
Oh, okay.
So if you attended the inclusion training, yeah, great point. So if you attended the inclusion training, we had kind of like a quiz we sent out after. We're working on getting it kind of automated. So they will be up in the future, near future. We'll probably announce on the company call when we kind of get things worked out. But yeah, that's a great point. And we will have a quiz for this one as well. And we'll also have a badge of some sort for this, which Breakout Group won. It wasn't really a competition.
Dave,
Everyone won, yes.
because that's the sales in him.
Yeah.
But no, you all did a great job. And, you know, I just think that, you know, it's easy when people love diversity and just want to learn more. And I see so many faces that really represent your desire to want to learn more. So, you know, it's not just owned by this, it's owned by everyone. So it looks like we were Breakout Group number 1, coincidence. So you all did great.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for attending and participating in the discussions. We really appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day.